The third season of Jujutsu Kaisen makes one thing very clear from the very first minutes. There is no more room for naivete, easy hope, or comfortable endings. Everything that was destroyed in Shibuya wasn't left behind. On the contrary, it became the foundation of an even crueler world, where decisions are made without hesitation and human lives are treated as disposable pieces in a game that no one truly understands. The anime's return doesn't try to win back the viewer with nostalgia or lengthy explanations. It simply advances, like a sharp blade, cutting through any illusion of stability that might still exist. Right in the first episode, the political and moral weight of the story imposes itself with full force. The Jujutsu Society, which had already shown itself to be flawed and contradictory, definitively assumes its coldest face by officially decreeing the execution of Yuji Itadori. No matter how many times he saved lives, how many sacrifices he made, or how much he suffered, the simple fact of being Sukuna's vessel is enough to condemn him. This decision doesn't sound heroic or necessary. It sounds bureaucratic, almost mechanical, as if Yuji were merely an administrative error that needs to be corrected. The choice of Yuto Katsu as the executioner is not random, and the episode makes a point of transforming this encounter into something deeply uncomfortable. Yuta is not presented as a villain nor as a vigilante, but as someone who perfectly understands the weight of taking a life. When he faces Yuji, there is no hatred, no exaggerated provocations, only a silent tension that communicates more than any dialogue could. The combat is not long nor spectacular in the traditional sense. It is direct, efficient, and cruel, reflecting exactly the kind of world that Jujutsu Kaisen became after Shibuya. The moment Yuji falls is not treated as a glorious climax, but as a painful reminder of his fragility. For the first time, the protagonist doesn't seem like someone walking towards his heroic destiny, but rather a victim of a system that decides who deserves to keep breathing. And then, when everything seems over, the revelation happens. Yuta revives Yuji, making it clear that his death was merely a strategic act. Still, the feeling of relief doesn't come immediately. Because the message has already been conveyed, Yuji could be killed at any moment, and no one but his allies would care. The second episode further deepens this feeling of instability. There's no time for celebration or rest. The narrative quickly expands its focus to show that the problem is now much bigger than the life of a single sorcerer. The world is broken, barriers have been breached, and a new reality begins to take shape before the characters. The Culling Game. Unlike previous threats, this game isn't something that can be defeated with brute force or a clearly defined final villain. It exists as a system, an impersonal mechanism that transforms humans into pawns and survival into macabre entertainment. The revelations involving Tengen reinforce the almost existential nature of this new phase of the story. What once seemed like an ancient and wise organization now appears fragile, full of secrets and questionable decisions. The very idea of balance between humans, curses, and sorcerers begins to crumble, giving way to a scenario where no one has complete control of the situation. It is at this point that Jujutsu Kaisen ceases to be merely a story of supernatural battles and begins to discuss power, responsibility, and the real cost of maintaining an artificial order. Megumi Fushiguro stands out in this episode in a quiet but profoundly impactful way. His motivation ceases to be abstract and becomes brutally personal with Tsumiki's situation. He no longer fights for ideals or obligations as a sorcerer, but for the only thing that still gives meaning to his existence. This subtle change transforms Megumi into one of the most dangerous characters of the season, not because of his strength, but because of his willingness to go wherever necessary. Even if it means crossing limits he would never have considered before. Yuji, in turn, returns to the narrative carrying an even greater weight. He doesn't gain a new inspiring determination, nor does he make speeches about saving everyone. What we see is a young man who accepts, almost silently, that his life no longer belongs to him. Still, he chooses to continue. Not out of hope, not for glory, but because giving up would mean allowing the suffering caused by Sukuna and the Jujutsu system itself to become completely pointless. This silent choice is what makes Yuji such a unique protagonist within the genre. The tone of these first two episodes is deliberately oppressive. The soundtrack, the more restrained pace, and the dialogues laden with subtext build an atmosphere where danger comes not only from curses or visible enemies, but from the very rules of the world. Every decision seems wrong in some way, and every path chosen exacts too high an emotional price. Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't try to alleviate this tension. It fuels it, making it clear that the season will not be about easy victories, but about survival in a scenario where failure is almost inevitable. By the end of these initial episodes, it becomes evident that the third season does not intend to repeat the successful formulas of the past. It wants to deconstruct, challenge, and, above all, test its characters to the limit. The Culling Game is not just a narrative arc. It's a cruel experiment that puts everything the sorcerers believe they protected to the test. If the beginning is already so heavy, the question that remains is not who will win, but who will still be standing when it's all over. And perhaps that's the greatest strength of Jujutsu Kaisen, showing that in a cursed world, continuing to fight doesn't mean winning. It only means refusing to disappear.